everybody. How's everyone doing? Good GEC so far? It's only day 3. Cool. So thank you for everyone for coming along. This session is Invent a Game, Reinvent Yourself. And Jen and I both appreciate that you've all come here today. Cool. So just a quick introduction. My name's Joshua Boggs. I'm the director of a studio called Love Shack. We made a video game called FRAMED. I'm also a member of Jen's wonderful Checkpoint, and I'll let her introduce herself.
And is my clip-on microphone working well enough? Great, because I can't stand here because then you can't see. I'm vertically challenged. So I'm Dr. Jennifer Hazel, but even though I graduated from medical school like 6 years ago, that still sounds really weird. Jen is fine, and unlike Josh, I don't have any kind of accolades or qualifications in the gaming industry, but my biggest achievement is that I've nearly got the Platinum Trophy for Uncharted 4. Nearly. What I am good at is watching. So I'm a medical doctor that now specializes in psychiatry, and what we do is we watch. We watch people, we see how they think, how they behave, and we try to help them in some way. And being close to Josh and being close to my friends and colleagues in the games industry, I watched and I realized that there was this obvious link between games and mental health. And it wasn't like it was going in one direction or another. Sometimes they would be beneficial, sometimes not. But there was something there that was just out of reach. Like I just couldn't quite visualize it, much like the speedrun trophy for Uncharted 4. It was like right there. So I thought, you know what, no one else is doing this. I'm gonna be that bridge. So I founded Checkpoint. Checkpoint's a non-profit organization that runs out of Australia, which is where we live. And it acts at the intersection of video games and mental health in all of the forms that takes. So we provide game therapy to vulnerable people that have mental illness or are otherwise disadvantaged. We do wellbeing workshops for members of the gaming community. We do wellbeing rooms at conventions. We do research and a whole bunch of other stuff. So that's us, and that's why we're here today, obviously. This talk does come with a trigger warning. I think it's important to mention that whenever anybody's talking about mental health in any form, that if anything that we touch on during this talk does kind of hit you or distress you in some way, and you feel like you need to step out, please do so. Obviously, this is here to be helpful, and if at any point it's not helpful anymore, we're not going to chase you down. We're not going to take it personally. Please just do what you need to do to keep yourself safe. And with that, I'll hand back over to Josh.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So this talk's just split into 2 parts. The first part's, I did a talk last year about my personal experiences and my psychological, undiagnosed depression and alcohol use throughout the development of FRAMED. That part's going to be fairly brief. I'm merely a case study, really. The second part is why you're all here, and it's Dr. Jennifer Hazel will be delivering practical advice for everyone how to look after their own mental health. So with that, we'll just get into it. So why have this discussion, right? Sharing stories is important. Not only do we all do it as our jobs, but sharing stories can help reduce stigma. It's really important for people in the industry and industry leaders to stand up and say, it's okay to talk about this, because then others in the industry will also feel open, and everyone's mental health will, in theory, get better. The other thing is that the games industry is still uniquely young, given how far we've come. There's pros and cons to that. The pros is that we can still make changes to make our environment better. The cons is that we still have things like crunch, which as developers can trigger, vulnerabilities in mental health. And lastly, we all know this, games are a powerful medium for communicating, and it would be amiss if the developers themselves who are representing mental health weren't looking after their own. So yeah, like I said, last year I gave a talk called The Unsatisfied Mind. A lot of people approached and said they got a lot from it, and that was good, but I personally, and I think others too, we're also hoping for like more concrete actions. What to do next, like where do you go when you find yourself feeling similarly. So we decided to write this talk out. It's much more analytical. Like I said before, I'm merely a case study here, so you may find parallels, you may not, but Jen's advice is far more applicable in general. So there were a few contributing factors that kind of led to my downward depression. One was obviously the game itself, Framed. There were expectations of others. Once we released it, once we announced it, everyone was super excited about it, and there's certain expectations that come with that. But more than that, it was the expectations of myself. I have a personality that is very perfectionist, I guess you could say, and that just mainly served to add more pressure on the rest of the team. They obviously too would have been going through their own hardships, and I think one of the other major contributing factors, and I think as a society pretty much, right, like mental health awareness isn't really known very much, recognizing the signs. So there's no way that they could have noticed, the signs I was exhibiting, and I definitely didn't notice any of their signs either, which is pretty bad. But yeah, that's why we're doing this talk. If only there was some sort of, charity or service that was promoting mental health in games. I don't really know. Oh. Anyway, so for this last part, I don't like talking about myself. This is already kind of annoying. But we're going to get this very qualified doctor to give a more objective overview maybe of my personality and strengths and weaknesses. So I'll hand it back over to Jen.
I tried so hard to get Josh to write this bit himself. It just didn't happen. So from a mental health point of view, it's always really important to look at a person as an individual that has a longitudinal existence. So obviously someone is born, they live, they have experiences, and that's what leads to the way that they perceive the world and the way that they adapt to their environment. And we've discussed this, so none of this is going to be new to Josh as I say it. Don't look terrified, it's fine. So Josh's parents divorced when he was very young, and he carried a lot of guilt around for that, and it was something that he never learned to kind of express when he was much younger. Josh is the eldest sibling, and so whilst the family was going through this difficult time, he felt the burden of responsibility over his younger siblings. He wanted to look after them to make them feel safe, and yet simultaneously, because he didn't want to burden his parents any further through the distress they were already having, he didn't feel able to offload his emotions onto them, and that was when he started learning to internalize things. Around the same time, I think financially things were quite difficult for the family, and Josh learned very young the importance of work and working to survive. Josh has been employed in some way or another since he was 12, so he's now 30, so there's longer working than not working. So work became not only the driving force behind everything, but a coping mechanism. So once you take that away, it's very difficult to know what's left. On the other hand, those things are exceptional skills. That drive to look after others, that drive to keep everything inside, enabled him to handle stress exceptionally well. It also enabled him to kind of use his creativity in an objective way. And simultaneously was an exceptionally hard worker. And of course, everyone here will agree that to be successful in this industry, you have to work really hard all the time, which has its pros and has its cons. So what happened next, Josh will tell you a little bit about, and hopefully that analysis should give you some understanding of why these things occurred.
That's when I was supposed to stand up. Okay, so there were, I'm sure many people would probably relate to the pressure that comes with development. I think like the motivations behind why success is important kind of delve maybe more closely to like it's like respect from your colleagues, but if that's left unchecked, it can turn very quickly into basically just a constant seeking of external validation. So that sort of, I think the award culture around a lot of things, and I'd be interested to see whether like it happens in film and stuff as well, drives that sort of personally depressive downward spiral. And the other one was clearly, as Jen was saying about my personality, this sort of projection of myself onto what I was doing. Like, it took a long time to separate the two and be like, this is my work and I love it, but I need to not put all like my value as a person in it. And that's really hard. Like, I think everyone struggles with that because you have to really care about what you're making to make it good, right? So as things were getting worse during development, I turned to my, I guess, maladaptive coping strategies. So things like work. If things ever get rough, just do work. It just distracts you. It's productive, and that's pretty much what I used to do a lot. I probably still do it a bit, and that basically just led to the disruption of other relationships, friends, family, stuff like that. So when you're never there, there's always going to be that schism, and that basically led to alcohol abuse. And the thing with, I guess, alcohol abuse, I think it's indicative of a more base, what's the word?
A need for...
Yeah, like a need. Because basically what happens is, whether it's alcohol use or, gambling or risky sex or, actual hard drugs, it's all that risk-taking behavior gives you like a hit of dopamine, and then you start becoming addicted to that. And then towards the end of it, then I kind of got some help and realized, well, I didn't realize, was diagnosed with actual clinical depression. So that was very it was very important, because it was important to acknowledge that there was a problem, and being able to label it was incredibly valuable. So yes, acknowledging it. The other thing, I guess, it's going to sound kind of weird. I guess like as the story that Jen was telling, it's very difficult for me, and I think it may also be true of other men as well, to accept help from other people. It's just like the last thing I'll ever do. It's like ask for help. I'll just keep doing it myself. But learning to let that go and get the help of others and very close friends. The other really important thing, as I mentioned before, because to be diagnosed with depression you have to do at least some form of therapy, was I finally went and got therapy. And there's many different arms of therapy. There's like CBT, DBT, ACT was the form that I personally found quite useful for me. I'll let Jen discuss that during her part of the talk. And the last part was just actually taking a long break from work. Being able to sit with yourself and not distract myself was incredibly important to get back to the values of why I make games, why I got in the industry, as opposed to the things I became addicted to. And right here, there's only 5 points here, right? So it sounds fairly not trivial, but small. But this was a long process, over 12, 18 months. That's almost as long as it took to make the game. So yeah, I just want to make that very clear. And that's me. That's how I'm now doing a lot better. This is obviously anecdotal, and I'm merely basically a test case for what Jen's about to talk about. And there was one more point. Can't remember it.
That's okay.
That's all right. So to introduce the wonderful Jen, and she will provide implementable, lovely advice. I'll let go into you.
I'm going to start with a really quick story, because this talk can get pretty intense. It can get really heavy. And can we give Josh a round of applause for doing that again? 2 years in a row. Okay, people often ask me how I got into mental health. I trained in Britain, as you could probably tell, and I moved to Australia to start working in the emergency room. Medicine is very different in Australia. I didn't realise quite how different until this story I'm about to tell you. I was always interested in mental health. Whenever a patient that needed mental health care came into the department, the other doctors would give them to me because I found it the most rewarding. So one day we had a young lady, I think she was about 18, and she presented what the triage note from the nurse said hallucination. And I was like, okay, cool, let's see how I can help this young lady. So she comes into my examining room and I say, well, how can I help you? She said, well, there's a spider in my ear. And I was like, yeah, sure there is. You don't see that in England. That's not a thing. I thought maybe she was having a hallucination, a somatic hallucination. She was feeling something that wasn't there. But of course, I wanted to have a look, give it a go. I'm just going to get really close to Josh. So when you look in someone's ear, this is how close you get. And there's a magnifying glass. So obviously I had a look, and there's this monster of a spider with huge red fangs. And being the pillar of dignity and professionalism I am, I screamed through the otoscope on the floor and ran out of the room. And that was the day I decided that I would do mental health. So, no, do not call me, now's not the time. This is called the AAA model. It's something that I've pioneered for Checkpoint, specifically to try and help game developers and other members of the technological community. It's a model that is filled with education and practical points of intervention, and everything that's in there is evidence-based. The reason that I say I've designed it for game devs is because it's brief, it's memorable, and it focuses on the 3 key parts of well-being, which is your psychological health, your physical health, and your social health. It's not actual medical advice, so this isn't a prescription. It's designed to provide the audience with autonomy. So you see this talk, you think, I can kind of see a bit of that in me, or that tip, that technique, looks like I might find it useful. You go away, you have a read. You Google the terms. Everything that's in this talk has quite detailed notes that will be available on the Vault, along with links to the studies that we refer to and some helpful websites that you might find of benefit. And the model describes a 3-step process: audit, accept, and act. So to audit, what we are doing is taking a step back and without judgment or malice, just seeing what's there. What's in there inside, what's there outside, and just having a look. And then we move on and we accept that. And we go, you know what, whatever is there, I'm going to be kind to myself. That's fine, that's okay. That's what's happening right now. And just let it be. And then we move on and we act. So we introduce some very superficial, basic techniques that you can implement today, that you can go away and learn how to help yourself to optimize your well-being at any given time. And the beauty of this model is that you can use it however often you want. If you're a very stoic person that only ever gets stressed once a month, and please teach me how if you are that person, you could use it once a month, or you can use it once a week, or you can use it every 5 minutes. That's the beauty of it. So the first step is to audit. And this starts hard and gets easier every time you do it. It's based on a psychological technique called mindfulness, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. And a good quote is that mindfulness concerns a clear awareness of one's inner and outer worlds, including their thoughts, emotions, sensations, actions, and surroundings as they exist at any given moment. So what we've extrapolated from that is when we audit our current situation, we look externally, and then we look internally at what's ongoing and chronic and happening all the time for us, and what's kind of passing by, what's transient. There is no way I can do a talk about mental health and game development if I don't mention crunch. Unfortunately, it's not something that I can do anything about. I wish I could come in here and wave a magic wand and help you guys not ever have to crunch again, but I can't. What I can do is give you tools for your psychological toolbox to help you recognize the signs that it's happening and to help you to know what to do about it if it is happening, because we can't make it go away, right? I work with an organization in Australia called SANE, and they do a program called the Mindful Employers Program, which helps all organizations to create mental health plans for their employees. And I was sitting down with them saying, how can we do this for game dev? And I said, because game dev, they do a lot of crunch. And this lovely lady, she burst out laughing. She said, crunch? I haven't heard that word in 10 years. Because no one else does it anymore in the industries that they deal with. So why don't they do it? Because it doesn't work. It works for about 2 weeks, and then after that, you reduce your productivity, you reduce the financial benefit, and you actually burn out your employees, which has a knock-on effect. So everybody knows that crunch is linked to burnout. That's kind of reasonably basic stuff. But what is burnout? It's a term that we kind of use flippantly. It's a biological process. We've done studies, fMRI and SPEC studies, that show that in people who are on the spectrum of being burned out, there is reduced functional connectivity between the amygdala and their prefrontal cortex. So that's the lizard brain, the instinct feelings part, and the part that makes you act or run. Basically, it reduces how well and how quickly you can respond to emotional stressors, which means that you feel emotions less, or you're able to regulate them less, leading to emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and feeling like you're just not good enough. Of course, that's going to have an effect on the individual. They might come to work less, and when they are at work, they're not there cognitively. And then everybody else in the team has to pick up the slack, which is not that one person's fault, and it's not their fault. But what happens is there's this kind of exponential burning out, is that everybody around them gets burned out too, and then it gets worse and worse, carries on to the organization itself, and the ultimate effect is that there's decreased output and decreased profit. And everybody is sad. It actually costs the US economy between $150 and $300 billion a year, depending on estimates. So this is a real thing that has real consequences for not only the people, but the companies that run, the people that run the companies, sorry. Stress is the next thing that leads into, because stress kind of is what causes burnout, I guess. And I've got a very fluctuating relationship with stress. Sometimes I think it's great, sometimes I hate it. And I guess what I want to teach you guys is that stress, again, unavoidable, I can't take it away, but it doesn't have to be damaging, it doesn't have to be destructive. In fact, you can use it and you can make it work for you. Again, it's a physiological response. It's something that happens in your body that you've got no control over whatsoever. Impulses are released from the amygdala, again, the lizard brain, the hippocampus, which controls memory, and the prefrontal cortex. That travels down to the adrenal glands, which are just above the kidneys, and they release cortisol and adrenaline, or I think you guys call it epinephrine, which is what your body needs if you're standing in front of a saber-toothed tiger to know whether you need to run for your life or fight for your life. So your gut stops working, your muscles get oxygenated, they get charged, your senses get heightened, your heart rate increases, your respiratory rate increases. So everything is on this kind of alert for life or death. But we don't really see saber-toothed tigers so much anymore, which means that this physiological response is mostly inappropriate. And because the stress that we're dealing with is the stress of our occupations, which you have to do for at least 40 hours a week for most of us, this is something that becomes chronic and prolonged. But it's not all bad. It can be beneficial. So I saw this talk by Kelly McGonigal, who's Jane McGonigal's sister, what an amazing family, about how your attitude to stress actually modifies the outcomes of stress. So if you look at stress and you're like, hey, that means I'm going to work hard, you got a positive reappraisal of that process, actually any of the negative health outcomes are negated. People who think stress is terrible and that they can't deal with it, they die younger. And when people think stress is good, same as the rest of the population. And this was a study based on tens of thousands of people, like this is real stuff. It blew my mind when I learned that. I thought stress was the worst thing in the world. And so how do you think differently about stress? Think about how you think. Are you a pessimist or an optimist? Do you think very rigidly? Is it difficult to kind of adapt and change your mind? Are you an all or nothing thinker, which means something's either never happening or always happening, and there's no in-between part? Think about those different ways that you assess each situation, because those people who have kind of like negative thought processes towards stress, it actually reduces your threshold for being stressed, and it makes you feel that physiology much more acutely. So I've written Yerkes Dodson curve. You probably all know this is also called the stress curve, but that's the proper medical name. And this is the curve, which means that the more stress increases, the more productive you are until a point, and then it goes away and you start getting less productive because you're too stressed out. This is pretty basic stuff, but what I want to not tell you, what I want to remind you, I guess, is that curve can exist anywhere on that x-axis. So you can go all the way to the left and be someone like me that gets super stressed out super quickly, but also gets super effective super quickly. And once you learn to recognize that, you can deal with it. Or you might be the other way, that you can handle a whole lot, but you don't really work that hard until the pressure's really on. And how could you maybe bring that down? So the long-term effects of unchecked stress include emotional, cognitive, physical, and behavioral effects. And again, this is something that you guys almost certainly know, but maybe there'll be a couple of things in here that are new. So the emotional effects of stress include anxiety and depression, but also anger, apathy, just feeling I don't care anymore, acopia, and just not being able to deal with basic things in life. It's like the straw that broke the camel's back, right? You can actually have problems with your memory, with your cognition, with your judgment. You're suddenly making poor decisions, you don't know why. And amazingly, can have physical effects on the body in ways that we perhaps wouldn't anticipate. So you can actually get skin conditions like eczema. Ladies can get endometriosis. You can have all sorts of sleep problems and frequent illness. And of course, the behavioral effects that we kind of touched on before include substance use and also social withdrawal, When we look internally, it's important to look at our coping styles. How do you cope? What is coping? What does that mean? Coping in a kind of very bland clinical sense is the way that we alleviate pain and distress. It's the way that we adapt to the challenges that life throws at us. And they can be good or bad, or both. And that might change depending on what day it is, or what the situation is. there's way too many coping strategies to actually stand here and tell you about. Freud described at least 20. He did like talking a lot, but yes, there are a lot. But a really good kind of basic model is this first bullet point here, which is whether it's appraisal, problem, emotion, or occupation focus. So it kind of takes all of these different defense mechanisms and pops them into neat little categories. Appraisal-focused coping is how you look at the situation. So perhaps there's a stressful event and then you go, well, you know what, could be worse. Every cloud has a silver lining, that sort of thing. Problem-focused is, I guess, the way I solve things, and it can be good and bad. So, for example, when I moved to Australia, I get bills from the UK still, and I don't like bills. I'm that sort of person that goes, right, I'm gonna sort that out like now. But I can't because it's like 12 hours ago there. So I just have to sit and look at this piece of paper and just wait for 12 hours until I can do something about it. So I had to learn that kind of, well, yeah, problem solving, good coping mechanism, but not if you can't solve that problem immediately. I'm probably gonna need to learn something else to alleviate that distress until I can deal with it. Emotion focused, again, can be good, can be bad. Some people, they seek support from their friends and family. Other people might do self-harming behaviors to alleviate that emotion. And occupation focused, again, something that we talked about with Josh. You can use work as a coping mechanism, and that is a very positive thing to do in most cases. It's a really, really good way of getting your mind off stuff, and hopefully you like what you do, so it's going to cheer you up in a way. But what if you're doing it so much that you've just neglected everything else? That's when that positive coping mechanism becomes maladaptive. So have a think about the way that you cope. What tools do you use? Maybe, have a look at the slides in the vault where we've got a list of all the different ones, or do some research yourself. You just pop it into Google and find out what do you use, and is it helpful or unhelpful, and how could you perhaps, optimize it. It's very important when we talk about mental health to approach actual clinical diagnoses. I only touch on depression and anxiety because I wish I had a whole day, but I don't. I've got 45 minutes. So these two, depression and anxiety, are the most common. If we imagine that the room is the demographic of the world, if you split you guys down the middle, 50% of you will have a mental health issue at some point in your life. A quarter of you, it will be this year. So, we're talking about something that's endemic, like this happens all the time, and it will be probably one of these two, and you might not even recognize it. Anxiety is exceptionally common, exceptionally treatable, presents in a whole bunch of different ways that you might not even realize. So everybody knows about kind of generalized anxiety disorder, social disorder, panic disorder, which usually present with these sorts of symptoms. So lots of worrying, ruminating, crunching over the same thing in your head. You can get irritable, have that kind of, we call it in medicine, a feeling of impending doom, which sounds very dramatic, but it's kind of like, that feeling in your tummy that something's about to go wrong. There can be physical symptoms that are very often mistaken for an actual medical problem. And psychosomatic is a word that means, a physical symptom in response to a psychological stressor. The symptom's real. It's not imaginary, like the pain is real, the tummy problems are real. They don't have a biological cause as such. They have a cause that started in the mind, and it's all to do with that stress response I was talking about earlier. When you've got all these signals and these hormones racing around your body all the time, there's gonna be a physical response. The thing about anxiety is everybody gets anxious, everybody. But when is it a problem? Someone could have a diagnosis of anxiety disorder when that feeling is intrusive, pervasive, and leads to avoidance. So when it's coming in when you don't want it, and that's happening a lot, and then your behavior is responding to that. So the classic example is a panic attack or a panic disorder due to an open space. You start worrying about it, and then you start avoiding open spaces. Whereas, for example, I was very anxious about coming on stage, but I still did it. So is that an anxiety disorder? Probably not. And it's important to consider the other types of anxiety that aren't as commonly discussed, like PTSD and OCD. They are types of anxiety disorder. The treatment is largely the same or in similar veins. So these are things also to think about, that you might not consider that to be an anxiety disorder, but perhaps if you were to kind of look it up and maybe go and get the help, you would realize that they're so treatable and there's so many people that are experiencing it and you're not alone at all. And of course, depression. I don't think that I would be controversial at all by saying that the game developing community is largely made up of men. That's not a bad thing or a good thing, it just is what it is. And men don't talk about their feelings as much, and they don't share with their friends as much. And when they get depression, sometimes it presents differently to how you see it on the telly or how you see it in women. Men don't get so much the kind of like crying and emotional symptoms. Men get withdrawn, and they might get irritable. They might feel very guilty, hopeless or despairing, and keep all of that inside. So I think it's really important in the game development community that we really do advocate for men's mental health. Because it is so important and so under-addressed, and you guys are as important as us, so everybody should have a chance to have the ultimate well-being. This diagram on the left, I unfortunately couldn't credit because I couldn't find who did it, but it's such a beautiful representation of the public perception of depression versus what people actually experience. It's not just being sad, there's like all this other stuff. As well as being sad. And again, like anxiety, it's so treatable. It's so treatable. And all it needs is that kind of reaching out process. So if you feel like this is you or someone you know, take that first step. Okay, so we're going to move on to the acceptance part of our talk, which involves us taking what we've learned and removing any judgment or feeling about it. Just, this is what it is, it's there, so what? You have to kind of learn to forgive yourself and let it go, as Elsa might say. Look at it with a peaceful curiosity. It's really hard, but really powerful once you learn how to do this. It takes a lot of practice. So we've got a mindfulness exercise that takes about 3 minutes. If you're not into it, it's only 3 minutes long. I hope this is going to work because we couldn't get the microphone to work, so I might just do you want to hold it down? So this is an exercise from an app called Stop, Breathe and Think. We're not affiliated with them at all, but I wish that we were because they're awesome. Should we give it a go?
Yeah, we'll see if it is.
Oh. I'm not connected to the internet.
Mindful breathing. Close your eyes and rest your hands on your knees. Bring your attention to the touch of your body on your seat. Feel the weight of your body on your chair or cushion. Make sure that your back is straight and that you're comfortable. Take a few deep breaths. While you're breathing deeply, relax your shoulders, your stomach muscles, the muscles in your face, your hands, and your legs. Let go of all the tightness in your body. Now bring your attention back to your breath. Notice what it feels like as it enters through your nose, goes down through your throat, filling your lungs, and back out through your nose. Notice your stomach and chest rise and fall each time you breathe in and each time you breathe out. and just allow your breathing to be natural and relaxed. Now bring your attention to the feeling of your breath in your nose. Feel your breath as it comes in and goes out. Just focus on this sensation, paying attention to each time you breathe in and each time you breathe out. As you inhale, maybe your breath feels cool. And as you exhale, maybe it feels a little warmer. When your mind wanders, or if you become distracted, just notice what's going on in your head, and then gently bring your attention back to your breath, going in and out. Focus on the feeling of your breath and allow thoughts and feelings to come and go in the background. Now gently bring your attention back to the touch of your body on your seat and open your eyes.
I've got a confession, that's just an excuse for me to kind of chill out for a little bit. No, mindfulness is like really, really, really important as a skill, because if you're able to kind of take that step back, ground yourself, practice that deep breathing, it actually physiologically removes a lot of the pent-up stress and energy that's going on. And it also helps your mind to reframe a lot of the stuff that's going on, taking a break from those ruminations and kind of helping yourself to reground and recenter.
Mike?
Oh, it did work. Oh well. So, we'll move on to ACT, the third part of our model. We had to think about what's going on around us, what's going on inside and outside, and now we're going to take the opportunity to learn some evidence-based and effective techniques that are taken from existing validated psychological therapies to do what you can about what you found within there. And that's what I want to emphasize. Do what you can. You know, you're not going to learn everything straight away. You're not going to be a master at CBT after one 60-minute lecture. You're not going to be able to control what's around you, but you can do what you can. And that's okay. That's great, because you did what you could. Again, we're going to look externally and then internally, discuss how you can engage your studio, and a few, I call them thought hacks, to get you to maybe think of the world a little bit differently. And I'm seeing everybody yawn. Maybe I should put the mindfulness at the end. So, I'd like to talk about, if you have the ability, or if you are someone who could talk to the person who has the ability, how one would engage their studio. Engagement is defined as the employee's emotional commitment to the organization and its goals. And not only does it make people feel great and want to work really hard, it also, we have studies that show it increases profit and output for the company. It's essentially the opposite of crunch. And it's not just wrapping your team up in cotton wool or mollycoddling. This is real steps that can be taken to increase team cohesion and productivity. So here are my suggestions for how to create an engaging studio. Have a curfew and stick to it. If you're the person that sets that curfew, make sure you go home at that time and don't let anyone else hang around. If they want to go home and they want to work at home, you can't control that. But if you can, your studio should have a curfew. Encourage autonomy. Let people go off and do their own pursuits. If they're interested in something, that's great. Let them explore that and give them feedback. You know, let them explain to you what they're exploring. If someone feels like they're able to have their own interests and that they're valued by the company, they're more likely to include that inspiration in their own work. Manage your resources. I heard a tip from an anonymous developer once that however long you think something will take, it will take twice as long. So, as you know, make sure that you've got, or you're giving your team enough, and ensure that the team remains the same as much as you can. If that means that you need to kind of validate them more, if you need to give them a greater incentive, a team's productivity improves if they're the same people. If there's a big employee turnover, as happens with crunch and burnout, you remove that. Check in. Now, if you don't take away anything from this talk, please listen to this next 35 seconds and take this. Are you okay? No. Are you okay? Ask it twice. Whenever I see a patient or a friend or my family or anyone and I say, hey, you okay? Everybody just goes, yep. And it's just automatic, it just rolls out. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean they're okay. So you say, cool, yeah, but are you? Are you okay? The second time, I guarantee, go out of this room, like after this, ask anyone. The second time the answer will be different. It might be, oh, you know what, yeah, I am okay. I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah, I am. Or it might be, no, I'm knackered. This is like such a long convention. Ask twice. It makes such a difference. And people feel heard and validated and listened to. And you feel like a great person. And it's a really good tip. So that's my one take-home message. Have an open door policy where you ask people if they're okay twice. If someone comes in and they say, I really want to chat about something, you might not have the time for them, but if I would recommend one thing, it would be never to say no, always to say yes, definitely. Not right now, because I've got this other thing, but I will make time for you at this allotted slot, and then try and stick to it. They feel validated, they know that you're busy anyway, but then they know that they're cared about. Have a mental health procedure and develop a referral system. This is a really odd thing, but I don't know about you guys, whenever I move to a new hospital, and this happens every 6 months, I have to learn how to pick up heavy stuff and operate a fire extinguisher. Every time. I never remember. If there was a fire, we'd all be screwed. But I have to learn it. Why do these procedures not exist for mental health? Have a mental health policy, keep people safe. And if you don't know how to develop one, there's a charity that can help you with that. Hit us up, we can help. Now let's move on to something a bit trickier. I mean, you might think that engaging your studio is the hardest thing in the world, but psychological differences are pretty tough to make. Thought challenging comes from a branch of psychological therapy called CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's highly effective and it can be self-taught as well as led by a therapist. It's not for everyone. It's very good if you're the sort of person who ruminates or if you have a kind of mild depression or mild anxiety. It's not so great for people who obsess, so people who have like obsessive compulsive traits, and people who are, we call them alexithymic, who struggle to be able to describe their feelings. So if you see something in this that kind of speaks to you, go and have a read about it. The key concept in thought challenging is this really weird idea that your thoughts might not be true. And that's a really odd thing to think, because the way that we've led ourselves through the world, through our entire life, everything we perceive and everything that we know to be true is led by our thoughts. So if I just sit around and tell you, hey, no, they're not true, they're lying, you'd be like, sorry? Like, how am I supposed to perceive the world if I don't know what's real and what's not? But your thoughts aren't always true. In fact, we have a word for it. We call them ants. They're automatic negative thoughts. And it's that little voice in your head that goes, you're not good enough. You are not going to do this on time. Or, you're worthless. It's that lie that you tell yourself that you don't even consider to be a lie because it was a thought that you had, so it must be true, right? It leads to a feeling, usually a very distressing one, which might lead to a behavior that's misplaced and inappropriate. So I've got an example here, you might see two people in the corridor talking about you and you get an automatic negative thought. They're talking about me and it's mean. And that makes you feel really unwanted and sad and rejected. And then you might avoid those colleagues, or you might drink alcohol, or you might even be rude to them and then lose a potential friendship, like potential professional relationship because you had this thought that wasn't true. And you didn't even know it. You thought you were protecting yourself. The beauty of this is that because it's a cycle, it means there's actually different points of intervention, which means we can stop this process. And one of the ways we do that is thought challenging. Otherwise, the cycle becomes there's a vicious cycle that's self-reinforcing. So I've got a couple examples of how you might do this. And it's a 3-step process. 1, you recognize the unhelpful thought for what it is. And a good way to do this is to keep a thought diary. If you have a situation that didn't go the way that you wanted it, or you felt rough, what was I thinking just before that happened? And then how did it make me feel? Once you've considered what the unhelpful thought was and the feeling that came of it, you just replace that thought. You go, no, I'm not going to have that one because it wasn't true. I'm going to have this better one. For example, it's all about balancing. No one likes me, you feel lonely, but some people don't like me. No one likes everybody, that's just a fact. But other people like me, and that's really cool. I've got some great friends. It's all about that balance. And ants I call them having flavors. There are different flavors of ants. And not that I eat ants, I never really considered that. There's flavors of ants. They can be catastrophizing. So a catastrophizing one is the worst possible outcome is going to happen here. So just before we came in, I was like, Josh, what if no one turns up? And he's like, well, at least one person will turn up, and if no one turns up, we don't have to do it. Okay. I'm all right with that. Some ants are mind reading. So I might think that I see someone, and like that previous example, I know that they're talking about me, or I know what they're thinking. He must think that I'm not very good, for example. Some ants predict the future, which is similar to catastrophizing. Some ants, they personalize, they make something about them. So you might see, again, two people interacting, you assume it's something to do with you, but it might not be, or it might be something good to do with you. And a really powerful one is the should, must, can't, always, never statements, these kind of very black and white. It's either one or the other and there's no in between. This is one of the easiest points of intervention, actually, because if you think, oh, this always happens, or that is never going to occur, or I must do this, then you just change that one word and you've done this. You go, oh, I can, that would be good, or it would be ideal if that did happen. You just change that one word and you've just done some thought challenging. The next technique is called thought diffusion. And this comes from ACT, Acceptance Commitment Therapy. This is the one that Josh did. And it's based on the idea that our thoughts are linked in an intrinsic way. So I've given you the idea here, don't think of an elephant, because of course you will. And not just thinking of an elephant, you'll probably think of what it looks like. It's got big ears, it's got the tusks and stuff. You might think of Dumbo. You might think of the noise that it makes, the trumpet thing. All of these ideas are linked together in your head. And that's a very obviously simplistic example, but if you extrapolate that, it means that thoughts, like the ones we were having before, could be linked in your head, and that could cause things to happen that you didn't really want to happen, of course. So what we look at in thought diffusion, get it? Because there's cognitive fusion, they're fused together, and now it's diffused. They invented a word for it. Not all thoughts are workable. And if you could just learn to let it go, then you can just move on. So it's not as practical intervention-based as CBT, but you can just let it go. And there's like 100 techniques. You could sing the thought in the tune of Happy Birthday. You could repeat it over and over again until it makes no sense. You know when you do that, when it's like milk, 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 milk. You can do that with phrases. You can visualize it going into a cloud and floating off into the distance. These are just some of the ways that you can use this technique to get rid of those thoughts, the feelings that they give you, and just get on with the day. And the last one I have, and I'm going to rush through it because I've only got 5 minutes, sorry guys, is we talked a bit about adaptive and maladaptive coping mechanisms. Here are some positive ones. Anything can be used too much, but this is kind of like a bunch that we can take. Positive reinterpretation is a bit like CBT. And again, I saw a really good TED talk by Carol Dweck where she mentioned the power of yet, where there were these students, and as a test result, instead of it saying fail, it said not yet. It completely reappraises that entire situation and gives them a longevity to that experience. It's not just yes or no, it's not yet. Again, using humor, every cloud has a silver lining, they're similar things. Relaxation, I just taught you how to do that. Social support is really interesting because one of the things I didn't tell you about stress earlier is it releases oxytocin. Oxytocin is the hugging hormone. And it means that when you get stressed, you want to hug people. And when you hug people, you get more oxytocin. And oxytocin mends the damage that stress caused. So hugging people fixes the damaged vessels, the strained heart. Hugging mends broken hearts, essentially. It's a real biological thing. And that's why we seek support with, we're very social creatures, and it's built into our evolution. Restraint, I gave you an example earlier about like my bills that I get from the UK. I've now had to learn that I need to wait 12 hours before I call them, otherwise they'll be very mad. So I've learned techniques to put aside what I need to do now or what I think I need to do now and do it later so I don't make things worse. And problem solving can include planning, and it can be proactive or retrospective. And it also includes suppression of competing activities. And what this means is if you've got something that you're supposed to be doing and there's something else that's slightly less important, do that one later. So that's my 3-step model. We audited, we accepted, and then we learned how to act. And I hope that you can take that away and find some benefit in it. If you've been affected by anything that we've talked about today, here are the emergency numbers for everywhere I could think of. Obviously, my geography is not as good as it could be, but there's a few there. And here is a very not exhaustive list of some of the wonderful mental health organizations that are out there, a few of which are partners with Checkpoint. We don't have time for questions, but we'll be in the, the wrap-up area. Please complete the survey. I'd really love to come back and do this again. That would be really awesome. Yeah, of course. That one. So it would be really great to do the survey. I have business cards here. Come and take all of them, please, if you'd be interested. And we're running a Kickstarter later this year. So if you would be interested in helping us out at all by sharing and spreading the word, be so appreciative because we're non-profit, so everything helps. Thank you so much for coming. You guys are wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.